Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The rain usually had a soothing rhythm against my apartment window, a lullaby of the city washing itself clean. But tonight it felt like an insistent tapping, a demand for attention, each drop a tiny drumbeat building to some unseen crescendo. I was sprawled on my worn leather couch, a relic from my college days, staring at the luminous rectangle of my smart TV. Streamverse, my digital drug of choice, hummed quietly, its algorithm churning out another curated suggestion. I was a creature of habit. My days were a predictable loop. Wake coffee, remote work, lunch, more work, then the evening descent into the endless library of Streamverse. Movies, obscure documentaries, true crime series, I consumed them all, a passive observer in 1,000 fictional lives. Tonight it was a gritty, cerebral detective drama called Crimson Tide, set in a perpetually overcast Pacific Northwest. The detective, a perpetually glum man named Miller, walked into his cluttered kitchen. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the steam coiling dramatically into the dim light. My eyes, usually scanning the subtitles, snagged on something. Miller held a mug, a chipped ceramic thing with a faded logo. It was a local Seattle indie bookstore, a place I'd visited exactly once during a brief trip years ago, purely out of curiosity for their rare first editions. The mug was identical to one I had, tucked away in the back of my own cupboard, a forgotten souvenir. Huh, I mumbled, leaning forward. It was a pretty niche place. A coincidence, of course. The world was full of coincidences. I'd seen weirder. The next evening the rain had mellowed to a drizzle. I was watching a historical drama, something about Tudor England. A minor character, a maidservant, was lamenting her lot, clutching a small, tarnished silver locket. She spoke of how she missed her family, left behind in a small village near the coast. Her accent was thick, distinctly Cornish. A shiver traced its way down my spine. My grandmother, God rest her soul, was from a tiny village in Cornwall. She had a locket, almost identical, that she'd worn until the day she died. She used to tell me stories in a voice that held the same lyrical cadence as the actress on screen. It was an uncanny moment, but again, I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, a mind too eager to find patterns where none existed. We're all wired that way, aren't we? To connect the dots, even if the dots are scattered across disparate universes. The coincidences, however, didn't stop. They started to gather momentum, like small pebbles rolling down a hill, slowly picking up speed and size. A week later, I was deep into a cheesy romantic comedy, my brain on autopilot. The male lead, a charming but perpetually flustered baker, was agonizing over a choice of artisanal flour for his sourdough. He mentioned Pendleton Mills organic rye. I froze. I had bought a bag of Pendleton Mills organic rye flour just that morning. It was a brand I rarely used, usually opting for a different, cheaper one. But the grocery store had been out and Pendleton was the only alternative. My own bag sat half-opened on my kitchen counter. This was getting odd, more than odd. The detective's mug, the maidservant's locket, the specific brand of flour. Each instance was small, deniable, but their cumulative effect was starting to fray the edges of my composure. I started to pause shows, rewind, zoom in on background details. I found myself scrutinizing every prop, every extra, every stray piece of dialogue. Was I just noticing things more? Had Streamverse's algorithm become so unnervingly precise that it was predicting my obscure purchases and ancestral ties? It was unsettling, but still, my rational mind clung to the idea of a sophisticated AI, a data mining marvel that knew me better than I knew myself. The dreams started then, not nightmares, not exactly. More like vague, unsettling echoes of what I'd watched, infused with a creeping sense of being observed. I'd wake up feeling as if I'd been performing for an unseen audience, my actions dissected, my thoughts laid bare. One particularly rainy Tuesday, I decided to test it. I made an impulsive decision. I walked to a coffee shop 5 blocks away, one I hadn't visited in months, and ordered a triple-shot espresso with oat milk, a drink I rarely had. I made a point of thinking about it intensely, focusing on the specific order, the route I took, the obscure podcast I was listening to on my headphones. I wanted to feed the algorithm, to see how far its predictive capabilities went. I returned home, my heart thrumming with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. I fired up Streamverse. This time, a new recommended for you category had appeared. Urban Explorations. The top suggestion was a mockumentary about hidden gems in a generic city called City Unseen. I clicked on it, a knot tightening in my stomach. The opening shot was a sweeping drone view of a city street. My street, and then there it was, the exterior of the coffee shop I'd just visited. A man from behind walked out holding a cup. He was wearing my distinctive, slightly worn green jacket. He turned his head slightly, and though the shot was blurry and brief, I swear I saw a flash of my own side profile. My breath hitched. I rewound, played it again. The blur remained, but the jacket, the build, the gait, it was undeniably me. My blood ran cold. This wasn't prediction. This wasn't an algorithm. This was production. They were filming me. Paranoia, a venomous serpent, uncoiled in my gut. I started to look over my shoulder to check the peephole before opening the door. I avoided windows, feeling like a goldfish in a bowl. My apartment, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a set, every corner a potential camera angle. I tried to tell Mark, my oldest friend, about it. We were on the phone, his voice a distant, tinny comfort. "Dude, are you okay?" he asked, a hint of concern in his tone. "Sounds like you're spiraling a bit. Stress from work." "No, Mark, it's not stress, it's Streamverse. The shows, they're about me, they're filming me." There was a pause, a telltale silence. "Alex, come on, that's a pretty wild theory. You're probably just projecting. You spend a lot of time watching that stuff, right? Your brain's making connections." "No, you don't understand. I saw myself, my jacket, my specific coffee order." I was shouting, my voice raw with a fear I hadn't known how to articulate until now. Okay, calm down. Maybe you just need a break from screens, go outside, get some fresh air." He meant well, but his dismissal cemented my isolation. No one would believe me. It sounded insane. Even to me sometimes in the quieter moments the thought flickered, am I losing my mind? But then I'd turn on the TV and something else would happen. The show Crimson Tide came back into rotation. I saw it suggested again under a new banner, Fan Favorites. I clicked, a morbid curiosity overriding my fear. Detective Miller was having a heated argument with his superior. The dialogue was sharp, specific, and centered around Miller's growing obsession with a cold case, a missing person named Alex Thorne. My own name, my full name. My hands trembled as I gripped the remote. I fast-forwarded, my thumb a blur, until I reached a scene where Miller was sitting at his desk, staring at a corkboard covered in photos and newspaper clippings. I paused. There, in the center, was a faded photo of a younger man, me. From a university ID photo I'd had almost 15 years ago. This was no longer a coincidence. This wasn't an algorithm. This was deliberate. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. They had my name, my face. My life was becoming fodder for their content. I ripped the power cord from the back of the TV. The screen went black, a sudden, comforting void. I unplugged my router, my laptop, my phone charger. I needed silence. I needed to disconnect, to vanish. For a few hours, there was a fragile peace. The rain outside picked up again, but it sounded distant, muffled. I sat in the darkness, trying to reassemble my fractured thoughts. It had to be a hack, a deeply elaborate, personal hack. Someone was messing with me, meticulously tailoring content to my life, maybe some kind of psychological experiment. But who and why? Then a faint glow emanated from the corner of my eye. My phone, I hadn't touched it. It was lying face down on the coffee table. I picked it up hesitantly. The screen was on, Streamverse was open, playing something. A horror movie, judging by the eerie silence and the slow, creeping camera movement. My blood ran cold. I hadn't turned it on. I hadn't even connected it to Wi-Fi after unplugging the router. I stared at the screen, a primal scream caught in my throat. The scene showed an empty apartment, bathed in a sickly green light from an unseen source. The camera slowly panned across a living room, my living room. The exact arrangement of my couch, my coffee table, the pile of books I'd been meaning to read. It was a perfect replica. The camera stopped on a figure sitting on the couch, hunched over, staring at a phone screen. Me, it was me. Wearing the same clothes, in the exact position I was in. I watched myself watching myself on the phone screen. A voice, low and sibilant, whispered from the phone's tiny speaker. It was the narrator from a nature documentary I'd watched last week, a soothing, calm voice that now felt like a predator's purr. The subject, isolated and vulnerable, enters a state of profound cognitive dissonance. The boundaries of reality blur, the self-awareness becomes a feedback loop. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, screen still glowing, the voice still murmuring its chilling observations. I scrambled backwards, pressing myself against the wall, my heart a frantic hummingbird trapped in my ribs. This wasn't a hack. This wasn't an algorithm. This was something else, something supernatural. The thought, once unthinkable, now felt like the only logical explanation for the sheer impossibility of what was happening. Streamverse wasn't just showing me content. It was generating it from my life, maybe even creating my reality. I tried to rationalize hallucinations, a stress-induced psychosis, but the fear felt too real, the details too precise. I remembered stories, urban legends, about entities that fed on attention, on human experience. Was this what Streamverse was? A digital conduit for something ancient, something that had found a new way to consume. I crawled on hands and knees to my bedroom, fumbling for my car keys. I had to get out of the apartment, out of the city, away from any screen, any connection, just escape. The drive was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I sped down the highway, the rain a relentless curtain, the wipers barely keeping pace. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the watchful eyes, the creeping dread that every reflection, every glint of light might reveal a new frame of my life. I eventually pulled over at a roadside diner, a greasy spoon with flickering neon signs, miles from home. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh, buzzing. I ordered a coffee, my hands still shaking as I brought the mug to my lips. I looked around the diner. A trucker sat at the counter, hunched over a plate of eggs. A young couple laughed in a booth by the window. Everything seemed normal, utterly, beautifully mundane. A wave of relief washed over me. I'd escaped. I was free. Then the diner's old, wall-mounted TV, usually playing static or some local news channel, flickered to life. Streamverse's familiar crimson logo appeared, then dissolved into a scene. It was a diner, this diner. The same checkered floor, the same peeling vinyl booths, the same flickering neon sign outside. The camera was positioned exactly where I was sitting. It showed the trucker hunched over his eggs, the young couple laughing, and then it zoomed in on me. Me sitting there staring at the TV, a look of horrified recognition on my face. My eyes in the reflection of the TV screen were wide with terror. The soft, sibilant voice returned, this time from the diner's tinny speaker. The subject attempts to flee, seeking refuge in the perceived anonymity of public spaces. However, the narrative is all-encompassing. There is no escape from the story. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat. The other patrons looked at me, startled, then returned to their meals, their faces impassive. They didn't see it, they didn't hear it, or they were part of it. I stumbled out of the diner, leaving the coffee untouched. The rain had stopped. The air was cold, crisp. I needed to get back to my car. But as I reached for the door handle, I saw it. On the passenger seat, my phone. Its screen was dark, but a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanated from it. And next to it, a small, square device, a remote control. It was not mine, it was sleek black with a single glowing red button. The Streamverse logo was etched into its surface. I picked it up, my fingers numb. The red button pulsed, beckoning. I looked around. The highway stretched out, endless and empty. The distant city lights twinkled like malevolent eyes. The world felt thin, a backdrop. What if this was it? What if this was my life now? An endless, inescapable reality TV show created for an unseen audience, curated by an unknown entity. My fears, my joys, my most intimate moments, all content. I looked at the remote in my hand. One button, play, pause. Fast forward, rewind. What could I do? Could I change the channel? Could I turn it off? Could I change my channel? A sudden, overwhelming exhaustion washed over me. The fight drained from my body, replaced by a hollow acceptance. There was no escaping the narrative. I was the protagonist, the antagonist, the audience. I got back into my apartment somehow. I don't remember the drive back. The rain had started again, softly, gently, against the window. The smart TV was on. A new release banner pulsed on the screen. It was titled, The Viewer's Descent. I sat on the couch, the same worn leather, the same familiar patterns. The remote, their remote, rested in my lap. I looked at the screen. The new show was a high-definition, beautifully shot documentary about me, my apartment, my current state of despair. My face, projected onto the screen, was pale, eyes hollow, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. The narrator's voice, that same calm, predatory purr, began. The subject, having processed the impossibility of their situation, now understands their role. They are both the performer and the consumer. The feedback loop is complete. On screen, my on-screen self, the subject, looked directly out of the screen through the fourth wall and met my gaze. The eyes were my eyes, but in them was a chilling emptiness, a profound, terrifying understanding. A flicker of a smile played on its lips, a smile that was not my own. And then on the screen, my on-screen self raised its hand. It held a remote, it pressed a button, and my own hand, without conscious thought, lifted the remote in my lap. My thumb hovered over the glowing red button. I looked at the screen, at my own face, now smiling widely, malevolently. It spoke, its voice not the narrator's, but my own, yet twisted, echoing. Welcome to your new favorite show, Alex. It's truly binge-worthy, and the best part, it never ends. My thumb descended. The screen flashed, then went blank, completely black, but I could still see it. I could still see the faint, ethereal glow of the show playing behind the blackness. I could hear the faint, ambient sounds of my own breathing, my own heartbeat, amplified as if through a microphone. My life, my every moment was being streamed continuously, infinitely. I was the content, I was the endless show. And I could not look away. My eyes were glued to the blank screen, watching myself live forever. The rain tapped, tapped, tapped against the window, the only sound in the terrifying silence of my eternal broadcast.